It's the record on KUOW Seattle with pronunciation correction and more. Now, as I said, Seattle Aquarium does not keep cetaceans, but that's a big change and maybe more of a recent one than you know. People used to hunt orcas in Puget Sound for captivity. The state let them do it. And that might sound hard to believe, but our former Washington Secretary of State, Ralph Munro, he saw it for himself quite suddenly on a warm March afternoon in 1976.
A group of us had been out the night before to the Scottish tartan ball, and it's kind of like midnight, and you say, what are we going to do tomorrow? And somebody says, let's go sailing. It's supposed to be a beautiful winter day, and it was a beautiful winter day. So we all went out in a French sailboat. There were 6 of us, and we were just sailing along. We had no idea there were whales in the area or whale captures going on in the area. And it just happened that we got in the middle of it. It was purely either a coincidence or an act of God. I really wasn't up to speed on orca captures or what was going on, and it was just gruesome to watch.
What happens in an orca capture?
Well, first we saw a whole group of orcas coming down the bay as fast as they could swim, and we knew they had no place to go because we were pretty close to the southern tip of Puget Sound. And then we realized they were being chased, and we saw chase boats and the airplane. We learned later they chased these orcas all the way from the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. As they closed the nets, and the orcas made a run for it, and they couldn't get out because they'd set a set net down. The back of the chase boat had an open torch on it, and the fellow stood there with, as fast as he could light explosives, he just let them off, just boom, boom, boom in the water. And these were explosives that drove the whales into the net. And they didn't have a chance. So we had some whales inside the pen, some whales outside. They were screaming and crying to each other. We could hear that. And it was a mess. It was a sad, kind of gruesome mess. And we were pretty angry.
What was your reaction? You're seeing bombs going off and orcas herded around and crying. What were you feeling?
Oh, our guts were wrenching. I mean, I could still hear those whales scream back and forth to each other, and it was frantic and it was gut wrenching. We were close enough that we yelled at the people in the wheelhouse of one of the chase boats, and they said, "We're legal. We had permits. We're okay. Get away. Get back." And even if they had permits, we were pretty angry with what we saw. So we were determined to call some agency, see if we could call the Coast Guard or see if we could call, fisheries or game or somebody and find out, what's really going on here. Because what we saw wasn't very pleasant or very nice, and it just didn't seem like it should be legal. So we found out real quick that nobody answers their phone on Sunday afternoon. And we really didn't have anybody to call, but we thought, well, if we can't get a hold of somebody in one of the government agencies, let's at least try to call the press. So, of course, it's very hard to call the press on a Sunday afternoon. Everybody's home with their family. But what we did is we finally got a hold. Somebody gave us a personal number for a guy who's deceased now, but a fabulous reporter named Mike Layton from the old Seattle PI. And Mike was not happy with us, but he agreed to go take a look. And we thought, well, we weren't sure if he's going to write a story or not. And my family and I, we went home, went to bed, and we tossed and turned all night. And just what we'd seen was just gruesome. We knew those whales were out there in the middle of Butt Inlet, and we knew there were other whales hanging around, and we weren't sure what was legal and so forth. And the next morning, about 4 o'clock in the morning, I heard the Seattle PI delivery guy go by, and so I walked out to the paper box and got the morning PI, and here was this huge headline in the front page: 7 whales captured in Butt Inlet, and angry people, and so forth. And so I knew that we'd gotten somewhere with the reporter. And then later that morning, I went into the office, and I had a call from Attorney General Slade Gorton. He said he was really disgusted. He was just angry that this shouldn't be happening, and we should take a look at this.
Why was this happening? Why were these people capturing these orcas?
Well, they had been issued permits by the National Marine Fisheries Service and by the U.S. Department of Commerce in cooperation with the Washington State Game Department to watch over them for whales to be captured in certain conditions to be taken to marine circus parks and aquariums around America. And we were one place in the nation that was pretty easy to capture whales compared to anywhere else. It's pretty hard to capture them off the coast or somewhere off California or Oregon. But Puget Sound offers these bays and inlets, and that's why they were successful here.
And was this common practice, whether you knew it or not? That's how you caught orcas, explosions and nets.
I didn't know it at the time, but it had been a lot of whale captures. They had virtually decimated our pods, but based on their data, which said, there's hundreds of these whales, and we really didn't recognize then that there were resident whales and transient whales. There were whales that stayed right in our waters and other whales that traveled the ocean. So Attorney General said, you get over to my office at noon and I'll have some people there waiting. And so we started down the road in the courtroom, and eventually a couple of weeks later we got these whales released. And interesting point is that two of those whales still come into Puget Sound on a regular basis. Now, that's a long time ago. This was in 1976 this was happening. And two of those whales still come in. They're transient whales. They come in to eat seals and sea lions, which are desperately needed to be eaten because there's too many of them. And so it's a very interesting history.
These are 40-some-year-old whales, the same one still coming back?
Same one still coming back. And what really made the case, the decision hold, we told SeaWorld we wanted the whales released, and they were the driving force behind all this. We wanted the whales released. Secondly, we wanted them to leave the state. And third, we wanted SeaWorld never again to request permits to capture whales in Washington waters. And they said, well, we'll never agree to that. We'll never sign that. And we said, okay, well, let's go back into court then. By this time, we were in federal court, and we're going to bring up what you did in Penn Cove, where they had killed some whales and then kept it secret and wrapped anchor chains around them, took them out and sunk them. So we knew the gruesome history, and they didn't want to talk about that at all. They'd kept all that secret. So it was a tough case, and it was a case we won. That was the last whale capture in America. And after that, they went to Iceland to capture whales. There's still 2 Puget Sound whales in captivity that are alive, and there's a good deal of people in the state who hope to bring them back here and rehabilitate them and have them end their lives, at least in Puget Sound where they originated from.
Had you seen whales before?
Oh, absolutely, and that's an interesting part of this whole story. When I was a little kid on the west side of Bainbridge Island, whales were considered the enemy. If there were killer whales in the bay, people knew they wouldn't see any salmon or catch any salmon for a couple of days. So as kids, we shot at whales. We were actually, the state used to pay a bounty of $8 to shoot a seal, and you'd cut the nose off and send it to Olympia, and they'd send you an $8 check.
Wow.
So it shows you how the times have changed. I remember as a little kid, I was only about 5 or 6 years old, and my dad woke me up one night, and there was a little pod of whales, maybe 5 or 6 whales, and they were laying in a little cove right in just almost adjacent to our house, just about 100 yards away. And we could hear them breathe and lay in there, and it was just so interesting to lay in bed in a house and actually be able to hear whales sleeping, breathing in the water just right in front of our place. So, we saw whales as kids, and then we saw this all evolve. When the first captures took place, they were mostly captures because people were trying to kill the animals. And then the folks up in Namu, British Columbia, accidentally captured Namu, the first killer whale. That was about 1965, I guess it was. And Ted Griffith, a Seattle business guy, owned the aquarium there in the waterfront. He went up there and bought that whale and then built a pen and brought it down. And people were so curious. I know you won't believe this, but I was there. There were 10,000 people on the bridge and in the area to see that whale go through Deception Pass. We were so curious. And then Griffith took the whale to the Seattle waterfront, and it was a huge attraction. And then people really knew these whales are valuable. I mean, if we could get one and put it in a pen, people will come and watch it. And then that winter, Ted Griffith took that whale over to Rich Passage, just off Bainbridge Island, a little place called Waterman, and he put it in a cove there, and he kept it there in the wintertime. And That's where he first got in the water with the whale. And when we heard that, we simply couldn't believe it. I mean, there's a human being got into water with a killer whale, because we were always taught that they were just vicious, terrible killers, and they'd rip you apart if they got close to them. So time marches on, and we learn more and more about our marine mammals and species, and it's really been an interesting journey, I'll tell you that.
Well, Ralph Munro, thanks for telling that story and reflecting on then and now with our big marine mammals and our salmon here in the Puget Sound area. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if there's one thing people can do, that is to urge the legislature to open up more habitat. We've got legislation to open up culverts, and I know that culverts doesn't sound like a very sexy subject, but let me tell you, we've got culverts across our county roads and state highways and so forth that are blocking miles and miles and miles and miles of salmon habitat. And if we can speed up that culvert process, we can put more fish in the Salish Sea, and I think we'll have these whales have a much better chance.
Ralph Munro, thank you again.
Thank you.
And by the way, there is a bill in the Florida legislature to ban killer whale breeding and shows. The big park in Orlando, Florida is SeaWorld. They stopped their captive breeding programs after a documentary that alleged mistreatment of orcas. So Florida wants to make that the law. And also, animal news today, experts on cloning have broken the primate barrier.